So we welcome Mr. Priyanka on behalf of SLQS steering committee. Mr. Karunaratna, always you are helpful to us. So today also we have given you a short invite, but you have prepared a valuable topic for today. Please, podium is for you.
Okay. Thank you, Ravi. First and foremost, I must thank the SLQS in inviting me to this particular session today. Even though today's subject looks simple, certification and payments in construction contracts, which is a part and parcel of the quantity surveyor's life. There are many advancements which has been observed throughout the last 4 decades. I was always talking about last 4 decades because we are quite familiar with the FIDIC form of contract, wherein the FIDIC 3rd edition, which was issued in 1977, has undergone a lot of changes, a lot of evolution based on the inputs of all kinds of stakeholders of a project. Now, this particular session has got 2 days actually. In the first day, what I am planning to do is, when you wanted to become a chartered quantity surveyor, I know now there is a whole range of people here, experienced people as well in this forum. Therefore, in order to benefit from the newcomer up to a very experienced quantity surveyor, what I thought of doing is to break this into 2 days actually. Even in the first day, most of you may be very aware, very familiar and very comfortable with the content that I'm going to discuss. Let us just refresh our memory and let us just catch up whatever the things which is related to the certification and payments in the construction contracts, because it lay a very good foundation for you to prepare for the next day's session. Before moving on to the presentation today, I will explain you in a week's time, we are going to have another session pertaining to this same subject. But that in a week's time, what we are going to discuss is using these building blocks, which we are going to learn today or refresh today, to be quite precise with you, because since you all are practicing quantity surveys, it is very, this is a common subject that you all are aware of. But we are going to use those knowledge that we have gathered under 4 different areas. That is, how to do in practice the certificates and notices, then how the conditions of contract has captured, digested this particular notion, and the legislation revolving around that, not only in UK but also in Oman, and the payment mechanisms, different models of payment mechanism, which we are going to discuss in the day 2. Right. Today's topic is about interim valuations, which is one of the major documents that any quantity surveyor who is practicing at site is getting exposed to. So under that, there are 4 different things which I'm going to talk about. What is the purpose of interim valuations? Then meaning of value in the context of interim valuations, and the valuation process and implication of over or undervaluing works. Before going into that one, we will understand what exactly a valuation is. Right, I don't think I have to introduce myself to you. Most of you are doing that one, knowing about me. Therefore, I will pass this particular slide so that we can concentrate more on what we are going to do. Now, today I am going to discuss about 14 components of a valuation, which is universal across different types of conditions of contract. It may be FIDIC based, it may be NEC, it may be JCT or ICE, different forms of contract with different terminologies. However, most of the concepts are the same. Now, I told you what is the reason of having an interim valuation. Because as you all know, a construction project needs funding. The first mode of funding that a construction project is exercising is giving an advance payment to the contractors. An advance payment can be considered as an interest-free loan, because you're not getting, paying any interest for what you are paying. So that particular advance payment, which has been made by the employer under FIDIC terminology, can be used by the contractor in a very sensible manner, in order to facilitate the funding of a project. So this starts from the advance payment. But when you are talking about a project of a lengthy nature, if it is a 3-month project, if it is a 1-year project, or maybe it is something like a 5-year project, there needs to be an interim payment which needs to be done to the contractor to sustain. Otherwise, the contractor may not be able to pay the salaries of the staff, pay for the machinery that he has hired, or pay for the material that he is going to procure. Therefore, in order to facilitate this one, an interim valuation is of utmost importance. In the Housing Grants Regeneration Act in 1996, which has been issued in UK, it made compulsory that an interim payment needs to be made, even though in a contract, if it is not mentioned, as per the common law principles in UK, an interim valuation has to be done. The mechanism to that has been defined, which we are going to discuss within our next session. Then we are going to move on to the next subject. Now you know why an interim valuation is required. And before moving on to the next subject, let me just identify one more thing. You might have seen that in most of the contracts that you are dealing with, there is a minimum amount of monthly interim certificate. It is not only giving the contractor an indication of how much progress that he has to achieve, but also give a motivation for him to progress. Otherwise, if the minimum amount of monthly interim certificate requirement has not been satisfied, you will not be paid. So that mode of motivation is there. There are certain control measures and mechanism which has been stipulated within FIDIC form of contract in order to ensure that the contractor is progressing well. Now, let us understand the next topic. What is the difference between the value and the cost? Because the only mechanism that is available within the contract, unless there is no variation, is the bills of quantities, wherein each and every element of work has been very clearly defined. A value of each and every element of work has been defined. Now, there may be a sort of a misguide that most of the quantity surveyors are going through if they feel the value which is indicated in the BOQ is the actual value of the work. That is not the case. Because, you know, if it is a lump sum type of contract, sometimes the quantities which are stipulated within the BOQ may not be correct. Therefore, it is not correctly expending the rate by the quantity for the actual value of the work. Therefore, the value you are indicating there in the BOQ is a theoretical value that you need to understand. When you are talking about the value of something, procurement or something like that, we know tangible, we know what is the quantity of the item that we are going to purchase. We know exactly what is the quality of that particular item we are going to obtain. However, the value which is mentioned within this particular valuation is something theoretical. However, there are no other mechanisms which is determine the value. Therefore, we have to go for an itemized BOQ. In most parts of the world, still the itemized BOQ are being used. But there are ways and means in order to value work if there is no BOQ as well. Now, today we are going to talk about 14 components of a valuation. Why I did not use any of the capitalized terms is this is universal. As you all know, the works which starts from capital W as per the FIDIC terminology is the works that we are getting paid, which is comprising of permanent works as well as temporary works. Like that, variation changes, right? Why I used variation / changes means, as you are aware, the new engineering contract NEC does not distinguish the difference between a variation and a claim. They distinguish it as they give a single name for that one, which is called as compensation event. As per NEC 4, about 23 compensation events are there. There are few additions from NEC 3 to NEC 4. We are going to discuss about that in the next session. So that is why I put the word variations as changes. But since you are familiar with the FIDIC form of contract, I use the word variations / changes, right? And then we are going to talk about the expenditure of provisional sums. I hope you may have heard something called adjustment of provisional sums. In fact, expenditure of provisional sum gives the same sense, same meaning. This terminology is more UK based, because as you can see on the top right hand corner, this has been taken from RICS paper called Interim Valuations and Payments, which was issued in 2015. If you go through this document is freely available in the web. It gives you a big insight, a very comprehensive insight about what are the elements which are revolving around the variations and valuations and payments, right? And then we are moving on to the adjustment of prime cost sums and prices. You may be wondering why the word prime cost is not available within Oman conditions of contract. However, we are using that one. One simple example, we still used to have a provisional sum bill divided into two portions. One is called prime cost sums, the other one is called provisional sums. However, Oman conditions of contract does not distinguish a separate term called prime cost sum. It is embedded within the provisional sums as well. If you go to the definition of the provisional sums, it say either done by the contractor or a specialist subcontractor or a supplier. And then PC prices, I think you are much more familiar with the rate, PC rate. We are going to discuss about that as well. Then adjustment of provisional quantities. There is a separate mechanism for adjustment of provisional quantities as well, which we are going to discuss. Then site materials on site. Why I use two different terminology is, materials on site is the very commonly used term in FIDIC for terminology, and site materials normally is being used in JCT and NEC forms. Then materials and goods off site. Even though the Oman conditions of contract does not specifically mention about materials off-site, however, I think the new version is mentioning about that one, which is yet to be practiced, which is mostly revolving around FIDIC 1999 version. However, the version that we are using is still without materials off-site. But we are going to talk about that because it is useful for all of us to understand what is the scenario, what is the mechanism behind paying materials off-site, and when the employer feels that when you are going to acquire that particular material, what is the assurance that he need to get from the contractor. Then the contractor's design fees. I am going to discuss about that as well, because you know there are certain portions of site items wherein the specification demands for a contractor's design. That is going to be also part of a valuation if you are going to do that. Loss and expense, even though you are not much familiar with that one, it is also there. There is another thing called costs and expenses relating to contractors' right of suspension. We are going to talk about that as well. Then costs in connection with confirmed acceptance of overheads and profit, fixed price addition/adjustment, risk allowance, and what is called as director's adjustment. This is also UK terminology. We have a different term for that one. Once we go through the presentation, you will understand what it is. With that, let us start the first item, which is called components of a valuation work executed. Work executed encompasses two components called preliminaries and works executed by the contractor. Preliminaries can be either cost related, time related, a single payment, or a combination. But you have to bear in mind one thing. The preliminaries has to be agreed between the contractor and the engineer's representative before commencement of the works for the ease of administration of preliminaries. As you all know, when there is any sort of an extension of time claim or any sort of a loss of time, that cost related, time related preliminaries, the running cost of preliminaries gives a gravity. It is the governing thing in assessing the contractor's payments, apart from the additional works executed. Therefore, whether a preliminary item is a cost-related item, a time-related item, a single payment, or a combination of these 2-3 items has to be decided, subdivided, and agreed prior commencement of the contract in order for better contract administration. Right? A full description of preliminaries, because the newest version of FIDIC, NRM2, even though NRM2 is not familiar with us, I have heard that some of the BOQs which have been used in Oman has been prepared based on RICS new rules of measurement 2. It is a very comprehensive document which gives guidelines, a codified guideline to assess the preliminaries, the elements of the preliminaries. So it is very easy for you to understand whether something is a cost related item, a time related item, or a single payment, or a combination. Then the works executed by the contractor, right? Now, as I have told you, there are different ways and means of identifying a work executed by a contractor. Suppose the contractor is working without a contract. How do you assess the work executed by the contractor? Is he eligible for a payment for the work executed by him or her, right? Therefore, you have to identify the control mechanisms which has been imposed within a contract in order to identify what quantum of work has been executed by the contractor within a stipulated time period, mostly which is being transferred to the interim payment certificate. The value of work executed by the contractor will be readily ascertainable from pricing document. There are about 4-5 different ways. One is bill of quantities. Another one is called work schedules. Work schedules are basically based on the completed work. The completed work activity you are going to pay. The priced activity schedule is something very similar to that one. And then whenever there is no BOQ, there is a term called contract sum analysis. That is like giving a subdivision, giving an apportionment of the elements of work by dividing the contract sum. Contract sum is also a term which is not coming from FIDIC, it is coming from UK based contracts. Here we are talking about accepted contract amount. Now you must be wondering whether Oman conditions of contract has got something like that. No, Oman conditions of contract has got something called contract value, right? This accepted contract amount is a terminology which has been introduced from FIDIC 1999 onwards. Then stage or milestone payment schedules. This is also another way of motivating the contractor in order to finish one part of a work and go home with the correct amount related to that one. This motivates the contractor in order to expedite the work, right? In some forms of contract which has been used in Oman also, in the oil industry. Apart from the penalty clause, now there is for the acceleration, there is an incentive. An incentive clause has been incorporated within some of the bespoke conditions of contracts. So this stage or milestone payment schedules promotes the contractor to do so. Right. This is one of my favorites, favorite way of memorizing things, which I abbreviate the first letters of anything which I encounter. I used to call this APTEN, APTEN. You will be easily able to memorize when I'm telling this. Variations and changes. Now, if you are talking about variation and changes, you have to confine to the content contained within the conditions of contract. You might be wrong, because what you are seeing is only the tip of the iceberg. There are certain variations and changes which cannot be incorporated within the variations clause of the conditions of contract. I will explain you why and how. Number one, we all know the ordering of additions, omissions. The first letter addition A represents the A of APTEN. Additions, omissions, alterations, modifications, and or substitutions to the design, quality or quantity of the works, or the kinds and standards of goods and materials for use in the work. These additions or omissions, substitutions will not only be applicable to the works, it can be applicable to the materials also. Therefore, the first mode of variation or change is this particular family or cluster of elements contained within a typical variation clause. Now, if you see Oman conditions of contract, which is based on FIDIC 1977 version, and the later versions up to FIDIC 2017 version, even though it has undergone different wording changes, a little bit of an evolution, still these additions, omissions are there. So it is one of them. Then the provision of information, procedural or clarifying instruction necessary for the works to be carried out and completed. Right? Sometimes a contractor might have missed. A contract might have missed. I will say contract. When I'm talking about the contract, it is the contract which starts from capital C, right? Which is the bundle of documents forming the legal relationship of the contract, right? So if there is any provision or information, procedural, clarifying instruction necessary the works to be carried out, if it is not there, right, that needs to be incorporated. Especially this comes in identifying the legal requirements of a country. When a specification has been drafted by some foreign consultant, right, and if in case the approving authority overlooks that particular specification, right, this happens. This is very commonly happening in Oman, right? If the approving authority overlooks the procedural requirements which is not contained within the specification, definitely in order to abide by the law of Oman, you have to include that procedures. That will attract additional cost. So this is also a variation or a change. Then changes in timing, sequence or method of working, which you are very aware of, which is very common and which is already contained within the variation clause as well. Then the expenditure of sums which the employer has reserved the right to expend as work progresses. Now, this is a little bit of a tricky thing, because you know, as per Oman conditions of contract, there is a clause called clause 58, which is the provisional sum. The provisional sum clause has evolved in the FIDIC up to FIDIC 2017 version, still as the reins, you know, the reins in a horse, right, can be kept by the employer, because it specifically states provisional sum can be expended part or not at all. Okay, full, part, or not at all by the employer. That is why it says expenditure of items which the employer has reserved the right to expend as work progresses. But in the other elements of work, the employer has not reserved his right to do that. This is why this wording is very specific. That is why it says expending provisional sum items and prime cost sums items. Then actions in related to work found or at least thought not to be in accordance with the contract, right? If you go through this particular document, which I mentioned to you about the payments and valuations in RICS, these items you can find actions in related to work found or at least thought not to be in accordance with the contract, right? Now, for example, let's say there is some underlying underground cable, live cable that you will find which was not there within initial cookie or a plan or something like that. Now this is an additional work, right? Even though this is an additional work, this additional work is as per the contract not necessary for the completion of the works. It may be a supplementary work, right? When you are building a building, but there is a requirement that in your plot you cannot have a live wire, okay? It is not necessary for the completion of the works, but it is a supplementary work which is required to be done in accordance with the law of the country, right? So these are the different types, 5 types of variations or changes which is applicable to a valuation. So it has got a very comprehensive list which you need to do when you are doing a valuation. Then we will move on to the provisional sums, prime cost sums, provisional and approximate quantities. These are very common terms. I'm sure that most of you are very familiar with it. I think brushing up this will be better. I just wanted to ask from the organizers, am I going too fast or am I going too slow? Or is it okay? Mr. Ravindra?
Yeah, Priyanka, it is okay. Just go ahead with the same way. It's fine with us.
Thank you so much. Okay, because whenever you are talking about communication is not a one-way process. You have to capture what I'm saying. Maybe I might have talked without being heard to you, so it is in vain, right? So in order to have a productive communication, definitely I have to have feedback.
Yeah, so, now you can't see facial expressions. That's it's okay, but going well.
Yeah, thank you. Right. Then expenditure of provisional sum, we call it, most of the quantity surveys, they are using the word adjustment of provisional sums. Until the end of the final account, you are using the terminology named adjustment of provisional sums. It is subject to instruction, as I have told you. And then the adjustment of prime cost sums, prices, is subject to instruction by the contract administrator. Why I use the word contract administrator here is because you are talking about JCT type of contract. It is a different terminology. They are using architect, we are using the employer's agent sometimes, right? In FIDIC terminology, it is the engineer, which starts from capital E, right? Then adjustment of provisional and approximate quantities, right? Also known as approximate quantities. You might have heard of bill of approximate quantities, subject to instruction by the contract administrator. So these things we have to take into account when you are doing a valuation, right? Then again, there is something called materials, site materials and materials at site. Now, when you are talking about the definition of the word site, I just wanted to play a little bit of one of my videos in order for you to get the correct impression about the site, right? Until it is being loaded, right? I will just maybe it may not work, I'm not sure, right? Yes, until it is getting loaded, I will explain you this one, because materials at site and materials off site are very important things to learn. Yes. Now, why I mentioned this one is, this is very important in identify the word site when you are talking about materials at site, right? Because you might have seen some of the materials which is being acquired, which is being procured for a particular project, is dumped outside the perimeter of the site. Okay, so you cannot call it materials at site, because you are defining the boundaries as it is indicated within that particular video. You have to define the sites.
Excuse me, Priyanka.
Yeah.
Still, we can see the slide. Are you displaying video here?
No, I'm not displaying the CD. I shifted from the video to the slide now.
Okay, okay.
Okay.
Anyhow,
Now,
video was not displayed so far, isn't it?
okay. I think you heard it only, right?
No. I think you have to remove the slides, so then display the video maybe. We didn't see
Okay.
video.
Okay. Okay. Sorry, I think I missed that one. Sorry about that. Right. Can you all see that one?
Yeah. Now, yeah.
Okay.
But it is not working, no?
Sorry?
But it is not working. I mean, you have to run the video.
Okay. No problem. I don't think it is much important. I will explain this to you. Right. I will stop sharing this one and then I'll start it.
Yeah.
Yes. 1 minute. Right. Okay. Because what I explained in that one is right. Did you hear what I said, Ravi, related to that YouTube video?
No. That part I think we have missed out.
Okay, fine. So what I'm going to say here is, now the FIDIC 1977 version, the word site has been defined as the places in or under or through where the works are to be executed. But it is a non-exhaustive list of prepositions which has been used in defining the word site. But when you're talking about FIDIC 1987 version onwards, they have taken out this non-exhaustive list of prepositions, because when you are doing an airport site or something like that, the word over also will come into play, right? And when if you are preparing something like a bridge, the word across will also come into play. So the defined term site, which is stipulated within Oman conditions of contract and FIDIC 1977 version, has not got these prepositions. So in order to find a remedy to that one, FIDIC 1987 version, they use the word at, right? The works which is being done at. So it covers everything, right? So this is what I wanted to tell. In order to identify the vertical and horizontal boundaries of the word site, you should not use an a non-exhaustive list of prepositions. That is being corrected now. Anyway, now I'll come back to the subject here. Most of the contract condition comprises a clause that deals with the payment to the contractor for on-site materials and goods, right? Now, when you're talking about materials on site or material at site, that you need to understand one thing. First and foremost, it has to be delivered to or adjacent to the works, right? That is one of the golden rules that you need to mention, right? You cannot, when you are having a site in somewhere within the city limits, you cannot dump it half a kilometer away from that and claim for materials at site. That is understood, right? Number two, have been reasonably, properly, and not prematurely brought to or adjacent to the works. Reasonably, properly, and not prematurely. Now, for example, if you are talking about doing the foundation at this juncture, right, and you should not take the finishing items when you are doing the foundation, right, to the site, because it may be susceptible to damages. Who knows, there will be a natural calamity which way. So it is not a sensible way of considering materials at site. This is what I wanted to tell you. So it has to be reasonably, properly, and not prematurely brought to or adjacent to the works. Okay, so that is number two. Number three, it must be adequately protected against weather and other casualties. The word casualties is not contained within FIDIC, but it is contained within UK-based contracts. The other casualties include theft and certain other risks referred in the contract conditions. So even though you dump the materials to the site, because you know, when you give possession of the site to the contractor, it is like you are letting, you know that sublet, something like you are letting the contractor to enjoy the facility of that particular land. But if it is not secured properly, tomorrow the contractor cannot come and say that it has been stolen by someone. Therefore, I don't know what to be done, right? Therefore, it says it has to be adequately protected against weather and other casualties. Again, protected against weather. Now, for instance, you know, whenever there is a basement which is being constructed in a site, you know, this space which has been used in the basement, normally people used to store materials, right? But if there is any sort of a flooding and you do not protect that particular place from flooding, maybe in a holiday or any non-working day, then the contractor will be in trouble. It has to be adequately protected against weather and other casualties. So still the material at site, the contractor has got a huge responsibility to maintain them and claim for them in a proper condition, right? This is very important, not prematurely brought to or adjacent to the works, because some of them are susceptible to damage, wear and tear, and theft. All these things are there, right? So I define this as DRA for ease of memorizing, D for delivered, R for reasonable, and A for adequateness. Okay, So then you have to adequate protection, right? So you can easily remember those things. I think the computer is stuck for a while. 1 minute. Yes. I will start sharing again. There is something which has happened in the stuck. Yes, no problem. I think it's working. Please bear with me for a second. I think, yes. I think now it's okay. I can share it now. Right. Can you see now?
Yeah, we can see.
Okay. Right. Now, when you're talking about materials and goods off-site, as I have told you, until FIDIC 1987 version, there is no specific terminology called material off-site. But from 99 onwards, it was there. And in my second day, what I'm going to do is actually these topics which I'm discussing, I'm going to do a comparison for you, right? How it has evolved, the concept of material on-site, off-site, and all these things. Now, in order to have materials off-site, even though within Oman conditions of contract, the contractor can enter into a supplementary agreement with the employer. What is a supplementary agreement? That is, you are changing the terms of the contract. Okay, with the wish of both the parties, you can change in the terms of the contract unless it is not illegal. Okay, you cannot enter into a contract which is illegal. Right. Components of evaluation, materials and goods off-site, insurance, vesting certificate, and photographic evidence. You might have seen, and this some of the contract which is been done in Oman, administered under Oman conditions of contract. Also, the employer enters into a supplementary agreement with the contractor in order to facilitate the contractor's cash flow. But for that, he needs to have an insurance from that particular place. The vesting certificate. What does vesting certificate means? That once you pay the money, you acquire that good. That is the certificate which states the ownership has been transferred. This is called the vesting certificate. So vesting certificate has to be produced, and photographic evidence needs to be also given. And if there is any sort of a shipping which has happened, right, the shipping documents also can be considered as evidence for the payment of materials off-site. The contractor will need to discuss their insurance obligations in respect of off-site materials with their insurance brokers, who may well wish to investigate the nature and security of any premises where such materials and goods are to be stored prior to dispatch to the works, before they can obtain the insurance required to satisfy the terms and conditions, other contract conditions. Once materials and goods have been delivered to and placed or adjacent to the works, they are treated as site materials or on-site materials. It is like that you are changing, you are transitioning from one place to another, right? Then the contractor's design fees, right? Now, if you have gone through the engineer's contract which is being entered for the consulting engineer, the defined term for the engineer here in Oman White Book is the consulting engineer. We call him the consulting engineer. If you see the payment terms of a consulting engineer, you're keeping the 5% of the design fee until the completion certificate has been issued, right? On the other hand, if you are talking about the supervision portion of the engineer, you will be keeping 5% after the maintenance period is over. Now you know you understand the scenario, the mechanism behind that, because whenever there is a design defect, the client or the employer, actually the Oman conditions of contract, the what do you call this consultancy services agreement, the employer has been named as the client. Therefore, you have to call it as the client here. You can see that design fee 5%. There is a logic in keeping that 5% in order to cover any design deficiencies. Now, in the absence of a design portion from the engineer and in the presence of a design portion from the contractor, you can consider contractor for this particular element of work as a designer or a consulting engineer. Therefore, when you are doing the payment certificates or payment application, you have to enter into the terms and references pertaining to how you are going to pay this particular design fee. The most adapted, the most acceptable version is until the completion of the works, you keep 5%, right? It is something similar to the retention that you keep 5% towards the end of the project. Once the completion certificate has been issued, half of the retention will be released. Okay, so where the contractor is responsible for both the design of the whole or parts of a building, he or she will be entitled to be paid for design fees incurred for the design completed at the due date. Once materials and goods have been delivered to and placed on or adjacent to the works, they are treated at site as site materials. Okay. Once the materials and goods have been, actually this part is not relevant to this one, I'm talking about design, so this part is not there. Paid the design fees incurred for the design completed due date. Then components of evaluation, the loss and expense. Now, even though you are a little bit unfamiliar with this can also be incorporated within evaluation. Loss and expense may be included within an interim valuation. However, the basis of loss and expense in a contract must be established before any monies are included in an interim payment. Okay, so this is like finalization of a claim, right? Finalization of a loss and expense claim, which is made by the contractor, and then once you finalize, you decide the terms of reference how you are going to pay that one. Note that payments for loss and expenses are not subject to retention. Now, this is a little bit of a unique thing which you may not have encountered. Most of you might have, some of you might have encountered in a traditional payment application. You might have seen the work executed, material on site, and then there is a retention which you are applying. So these can be considered as other payments, because if you are applying the same formula and if you are applying another element to the works executed as loss and expense, this particular red colored term cannot be exercised because it will be subjected to 5% deduction. Sorry, 10% retention up to 5% ceiling. So this very clearly mentioned that payments for loss and expenses are not subject to retention. Then the costs and expenses related to the contractor's right to suspension. Now there is a document which was issued in UK. Actually, in next week I will try to explain you this in a nutshell. This is little bit advanced in the sense, not because of issued by this Construction Act or something like that. You have to go through it and you have to study the notion of that one. It is named as Local Democracy, Economic Development and Construction Act 2019. This was issued 13 years after Housing Grants Regeneration Act, which was issued in 1996. That this particular act says, Construction Act, it says that where the employer has failed to pay all sums due, including any VAT, actually VAT is not applicable, I think here, properly chargeable in respect of sum due to the contractor by the final date of payment, the contractor, subject to giving the required notice, contractor has to give a notice, as right to suspend to work. So it is a legal requirement. It is stipulated in the law of UK that the contractor has a right to suspend the works irrespective of the type of conditions of contract which is being used, type of form of contract which is being used, right? The contract is also entitled to recover all costs and expenses as a consequence. That is also there, right? And then the Housing Grants Regeneration Act 1996 also says about this contractor's right to suspension, cost and expenses. Now, if there is a period of suspension and then when the work starts again, when you are doing the interim valuation, you may have to think about this particular costs and expenses. Now, once again, I have to tell you, when you are talking about the costs, even though the latest FIDIC 2017 version says this is without the profit, okay, the definition which starts from capital C, cost, is without the profit. Okay, it says the contractor's right to suspend performance of any or all of his or her obligations under the contractor for non-payment. Now you may have observed something which I also will tell you. This now they are using the feminine version as well. Okay. Previously, whenever we are talking about that contractor, you say he. Now we say he or her. Luckily, we have two different versions, right? Technically, therefore, they use his or her obligations, right? Like that. They further provide for the employer to be liable to pay to the contractor exercising the suspension right a reasonable amount in respect of costs and expenses incurred as a result of the exercise of the suspension. So basically what you have to understand from the last two slides is the contractors, whenever there is a period of suspension in the contract, the project, no, not suspension of the contract is not the correct word. Okay, suspension of the activities pertaining to the project, the contractor has a right for costs and expenses related to the suspension, maybe idling or something like that. So there is another element for that one. Now there is no stipulation about that retention here, but it is understood. In the idling cost, there cannot be a retention, right? It has nothing to do with the works executed. Then we are going to go for, this is a very vast subject. I have just chosen one slide for this one. If you go through the NRM 2, the new RICS new rules of measurement 2, there are 6 places which you can find the word risk allowance. There are 6 places. You go and type it, you can find 6 places. Out of these 6 places, 4 of them are pertaining to the BOQ, right? 2 of them are pertaining to the design stage of the work. You might have heard that when you are doing a preliminary design and a detailed design, there is a risk factor the employee is putting. Now here we are going to talk about the contractor's risk. Now, Ravi, I think about I have about 10 more minutes or 15 more minutes.
Yes, you can take much as you need. No problem.
Okay, I planned for 1 hour session. It's okay. I have got a little bit of slides because I know it's a little bit difficult for you to sit and wait for about 1 hour without going anywhere or something like that. Unfortunately, I don't know whether SLQS is going to provide any virtual refreshments to the participants.
Yes. So next time we can share some images.
Virtual refreshments. That's a good thing. Yes. Right, because I remember that one person was in a desert, and he recently registered to Facebook. All of a sudden, he says, "Anna mata gathering teka kevala," like that. Right? Anyway, okay. It says components of evaluation in risk allowance. If the pricing documents comprises a risk allowance that is payable to the contractor in return of accepting certain risks, should they materialize, a portion of the contractor's risk allowance should be included in the quantity survey's valuation. Okay, and the certifier's interim certificate or payment notice. Now, this extract which I have taken from the NRM2, it says the contractor will be deemed to have made due allowance in his risk allowances for programming, planning, and pricing preliminaries. I'll give you a practical example. Now, if you are talking about a particular rate which is highly rated, now let's say there is a new item which is coming into the market. Again, I will take let's say something like exterior insulation finishing system. Okay, exterior insulation finishing system is not a new thing to the market, but I have some experience with one of my past projects. This is a combined system which supplants the requirement of a plaster and paint application. Exterior insulation finishing system is an integrated system which satisfies the requirements of a plaster and paint together, right? So now, whenever there is a contractor who is trying to price this particular element, if he realizes the fact that he doesn't have the approved applicator for this particular item, as you all know, any rate has got the material, labor, plant, overhead and profit, and then a risk factor. Okay, then he puts the risk into that particular rate because he has an ambiguity. Sorry, he has some sort of a degree of uncertainty whether he can find a proper approved applicator. So he might have got 2-3 quotations from an approved applicator, some applicators, but he might have thought that the lowest one is not giving the proper delivery. He suspects that. So he put that risk factor into account and then build the rate with that particular risk amount. Now, when a smart quantity surveyor who sees this particular item, he realizes he may be coming from an area where exterior insulation finishing system is like a bread and butter. Okay, then he or she might be knowing that this particular rate is not that much. Maybe all the other contractors, because they are scared of new things, whenever there is a new thing, definitely we are scared. Now, in these days also, when the COVID-19 comes, that we are extra cautious because we do not know how it is going to behave, right? Even the symptoms have not been finalized yet, right? We still don't know. There are some unknown symptoms which has been shown for this one. I'm not scaring you, but whenever there is something new comes, definitely we have that risk allowance. It is the human nature, right? Now here, this particular risk that you are mentioning here, right? That risk belongs to the contract. Okay, if there is a smart quantity survey, consultant quantity survey who sees that particular exterior insulation finishing system is much more cheaper than this, in order to save some money, what he can do is he will introduce another type of a finish, which may be much less. Then the contractor has to omit that particular item totally. When he omits, that particular risk is also omitted. So this is not the right practice. So this has to be addressed whenever there is a risk allowance. So NRM2 says the contractor will be deemed to have made due allowance in his risk allowances for programming, planning and pricing preliminaries as well. Then risk allowances inserted by the contractor shall be exclusive of overheads and profit. This is because risk allowance is something not falling into the family of the overhead and profit. That you have to understand. The scenario and the mechanism pertaining to overhead and profit is different. How do you assess the overheads? Normally, whenever there is a company who is running 10 projects, whatever the non-direct costs, overhead, which is in the head office and the accountants and all the other supporting staff, what they normally used to do is they apportion the overhead into the projects that they are going to get. Okay, and the profit is purely dependent. The profit is purely dependent upon how keen the contractor in this competitive market. With a profit margin of 10%, you will never be able to get a project, right? Because definitely there is a huge competition, your profit margin will be low, right? So those are two different mechanisms that you are going to price. But if you embed the risk allowance into overhead and profit, it will be difficult for the contract administrator to change that particular element. Therefore, risk allowance has to be separately mentioned. And in the NRM2, go through that document if you haven't, because I know when somebody is not familiar with we all are familiar with POMI. If I ask you any question regarding POMI, you know it like right? So you know about that. But in NRM2 also, I'm also not familiar. Go through that one, find keywords, then you will find very, very important things. This is why I told you there are only 6 places where the term risk allowance is appearing in the NRM2. It's because I studied that. Okay. Then it says schedule of construction risks, right? In the NRM2, there is a separate element called schedule of construction risks. Actually, the contractor can price that. Okay, so that can also be included within this, right? The next item, actually, this is the last item number 14 related to this today's session. A director's adjustment. You might not have been familiar with this one. This is also a UK terminology. Now, if you see that particular RICS document, it is RICS guideline UK. It is not global. However, it applies to us as well, because there are a lot of terminology that we can use. Now, for example, if you're talking about the word contract administrator, in any project under any form of contract, you have a contract administrator, right? So there is no, that is not a different term. So director's adjustment is not a rocket science or something new. It is a reduction or addition to the contractor's tender price. derived by the contractors estimated offered by the directors of the contractors. In simple terms, this is the discount given at the time of submission of the tender. If the tender has been accepted with this particular discount which has been given by the company, that portion of directors, how you are going to assess that one? Because normally when progressive payments have been made, right, that you are deducting an apportionment of that particular deduction. There are different ways you can do that one. It is not the only way. Sometimes the contractors stipulate it is applicable only to the measured items. Sometimes contractors select certain items and give the discount. So based on the way that the contractor is giving, you can do the adjustment as such. Right? So this is how it is going. Now, the last slide, which I will just introduce to you to this one, and I will wrap up today's session. I request SLQS next time. I need at least 1.5 hours in order to complete the practice portion as well as the comparison related to the conditions of contract and the legal context of the valuations and payments. Especially, I will go through the 13 items which is contained with Oman conditions of contract. Clause 60 will be completely discussed, but not only the clause 60 along with the advancement of the clause 60. So it will be very useful for you to attend the second session. We will have a very good insight about how the clauses related to the payment and valuation evolved with time, and what problems has been encountered by employers as well as contractors. Now, the good thing about FIDIC 2017, this is the typical sequence of a payments events envisaged in clause 14 of FIDIC 2017. It clearly mentions, right, engineer verifies the statement. It is not a new thing to you. 28 days. Each of the monthly says engineer issues the interim payment certificate. Again, now it has been subdivided into 2 portions. Employer makes the payment to the contractor, right? Each of the monthly. Now these time periods have been screened, the squeezed, right? Now if you are, because it says less than or equal 56 days, right? So this is little bit more stringent. Now, as you are aware, under one conditions of contract, engineer takes 28 days for the certification, right? And then the employer takes 60 days for the payment, right? Now, this has been more stringent in FIDIC 2017 version, and the final account also. Now, if you see the one conditions of contract, quite surprisingly, you can see that there is a 6 month, right? In the final account, that particular clause with 60 point final account, yes, yeah, it says as soon as possible, but not later than 6 months after the issue of the maintenance. It is a very, very ambiguous terminology, which has got a degree of uncertainty and a big risk to both the parties. Anyway, here it is clearly stipulated. Now, the good thing about FIDIC 2017 is at the beginning of that one, it very clearly mentions, very nicely mentioned these charts, the types of charts. It is better for a new quantity surveyor to get a copy of this one, put it in A3 sheet, and just paste it above your head at your workplace. Don't paste it at your home, right? You can paste your photograph or your family photo at your home, but when you go to the work, you can do something like this. This will be useful for you, right? So this is what I have to say today, and after a week's time we will be meeting you once again with the knowledge that we have gathered today pertaining to the payments and certificates, right? Valuations, payments and certificates, and we are going to go to another level. We are going to uplift our knowledge to another level, wherein the practice as well as the advice related to payment certificates can be given, so that you are quite confident. I know there are chartered quantity surveyors as well here. If you are willing to become a chartered quantity surveyor, you need to acquire not only the knowledge, but also the practice, how to do the practice, and give not only the advice, that is the reasoned advice. That means when you are giving an advice, you should be able to reason it out. Okay, I hope you have enjoyed today's session, and I think we are on time. And thank you very much, Ravindra.
Yes.
Over to
Yeah.
you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Priyanka Karunaratne. Do you have some time for the questions and answers? If our attendees have any questions about that. If anybody need to ask questions, please raise your hand. So one I can see. Ishara, can you? Yeah. No.
Yeah. Priyanka, good evening.
Yeah, good evening.
In this, NRM2 regarding this overhead and profit margin, I think that they have mentioned that in the NRM2 there are 4 places they mentioned not to put the overhead and profit. Preliminaries and the measured works and the risk allowance also there. No risk allowance for the
Yes, yes. Yeah, now it is here, Pradeep. Actually, I did not explain this to you. 2.11. Can you see this one?
Yes.
Yeah, it says provision shall be made in the bill of quantities. Sorry, I could not explain this to you. Provision shall be made in the bill of quantities for the contractor to apply their required percentage addition for overheads and profit to the following: preliminaries, measured work, including contractors' design works, risk allowances, work resulting from the expenditure of provisional sums. Okay. When required, overheads and profit can be treated as 2 separate cost items, namely overheads and profit.
Yeah. So I think that okay.
Okay, clear?
I think in the payment adjustments, so the risk items should be separately adjusted. That's where the Priyanka is coming with the payments.
Correct. You're right. Yeah. Yes.
Any other questions? So, it seems no other questions. I think in next session we can discuss in detail about the application of these items, what Priyanka has explained today with the practical examples.
Yes.
So I hope all of the attendees today participated will be participating, and also you can share this information with your colleagues, because these days acquiring knowledge is the best thing, because market is much more competitive and there are access to quantity surveys also. So acquiring knowledge is one of the thing you have to do if this moment to uplift your career. So today I take this opportunity to thank you into the Mr. Priyanka, because it is very valuable and also it is useful session. And also all the attendees, I thank you very much for the attending this, using your valuable time. And also if you have any practical problems, please send us emails to slqsoman@gmail.com. So we can send those to Mr. Priyanka before the next session.
Yeah, that will be useful. Yes.
Yeah. So thank you very much, Mr. Priyanka, again. So
yes,
we'll stop the session today. So thank you very much.
Yeah, it's my pleasure, and thank you very much for coming. And please stay safe. We will meet in a week's time. Okay.